report has the appendix that I'd encourage folks to take a look. That's a separate document, but it complements the report and digs into more of the processes we employed for this huge effort. As well as on the website, the board resolution is posted on there, and that really gave us our legs to even take on this work. And then our plan is to do some time for question and answer to hear from you. Use that time, and if something bubbles up after, just going to borrow Al and Annie to please feel free to reach out to them, or if you have our emails, feel free to reach out to us if there's more questions that bubble up. So always interested to talk about the project. All right, next slide. So we're going to go back in our time machine, back into 2020. And we have 2020 begins, and with it, this new virus is on the scene, the novel coronavirus, or COVID-19. It was unexpected, right? It would highlight these widespread health disparities found within our communities of color. And these disparities are linked back to the impacts of systemic or structural racism. And we define it here as systemic policies and practices within institutions that disadvantage certain racial or ethnic groups. And therefore, a need was identified, was uncovered to study this issue and take action for a study. And this was supported by our Olmsted County Board of Commissioners. And we look at this joint study as an example of jurisdictions taking intentional steps to understand and investigate these existing systems. Next slide, please. Yes, thank you. So the board resolution was signed in August 2020, asking two of the advisory boards, HRC and PHSAB, to take on this task and study this issue and bring this back with recommendations to the organization. And I just want to pause for a second. This is a first for Olmsted County. This was a first for this organization to direct two of its advisory groups to say, hey, take this on and you tell us, give us some ideas, give us some recommendations. Shortly after this resolution was passed, a couple activities we did that I want to touch on is we did a survey, because as you can imagine, two advisory groups, about, at the time, membership, staff assigned and board commissioners assigned included about 40 folks. So there's this big ask to study race and racism as a public health issue. What's that next layer? How do we start, what does success look like? How do we start getting our arms wrapped around this? So one of the things we deployed was a survey to all members asking them, what does success look like? What do we need? What are those requirements for success of the project? And we took that, and then that was also, I'll call a feeder document for developing our charter. Next slide, please. And using that information, and as well, we'll talk about this in a little bit, we had an independent facilitator come in and develop some things, but using that helped us develop a charter. So I pulled, the next couple slides, we'll talk about just two of the items on there. So one of them being our goal statement. So not only looking at systemic racism as a public health issue, but special emphasis on what the county does. The county provides and present those findings. So what do we have? What does the county have control over? And then next slide, please, Abby. And then we also use that to define our scope. I imagine there's a number of folks on this call that have led projects, activities, efforts. You need some sort of scope, some sort of focus, right? And so we use the information to develop our scope, what is within our purview and what is not, right? That was also listed on the charter. And so as you see, a couple of those things, such as what's the processes, program services Olmsted County provides, their operations, our policies, our systems, the current, what's available data information. What are other jurisdictions, communities doing? Because hey, if there's something that we could borrow perhaps, or take some pieces, let's lift that up, let's include that, as well as hear from our community. And then lastly, the social determinants of health. I just want to highlight, we'll get into that later in this presentation. This also was what was not in scope on this document as well. This is uploaded. It's in that appendix. But things that we don't have control over, such as Rochester Public Schools, for example, what the programs processes within the public school system. Okay. Next. So the decision was made to open up membership to members of those two advisory boards that were directed to do the work that were asked, not necessarily to put a number on. So in the fall 2020, or in the, is that correct? In the fall 2020, volunteer members from both advisory boards were asked who wanted to be involved in this effort, who wanted to be a part of that subgroup, we called it, or the project team. And we had 9 folks from both advisory boards that volunteered to be a part. And I just wanted to take a minute to really honor this group that gave a lot of their time, almost 2 years, our meetings of 2 times a month. I got to watch it, guys. I'm going to get misty. But I also just want to point out that, we were ready. Our first meeting was January 20th, 2021. And we were ready, like, all right, let's meet in person. Where are we going to meet? COVID's gone, right? Because I don't know if you remember, it seemed like numbers were going down and we thought we were like, we had a hold of this thing, right? And then numbers just shot up and it was like, nope, everything's virtual, no in person. I felt like it was, okay, we got to find document sharing platform, things like this. So they just, with aplomb, just really got together and really worked on this. And, this is a number of these folks have, work full time. I know a couple are going to school. So just can't say enough. Thank you. Okay. Next. All right. Want to go over the timeline, kind of give you a high level view of that project overall, the next 3 slides. So going back, the next, like I say, talks about that project. So going back to that late 2020 to the beginning, this one is just going to encompass that about August 2020 to about January 2021. We had an independent facilitator, Mr. Dante Curtis, came and worked with both advisory groups to, again, help get that next layer. What are your areas of focus? There's a journey map that we cite, and those areas of focus became data, scope, and community engagement, as well as defining guidelines. Again, this was a first for 2 advisory groups that haven't been meeting, haven't worked together. So what do they want to keep in mind as they go forward in this work? And we have 2 works of art that they came up with. And then these months involved, as you see, forming that subgroup, identifying tasks, finding out pulling together some of the data, the population data to start with, and I'll get into that on the next slide. I get passionate, I get excited about this. Okay, so this next phase of this work, this is the bulk of 2021. For most of this year, we heard information from population data. And when we say population data, we're really talking about that we call the big data, that the information about the geographical area of Olmsted County. Some of those things that were reviewed is Olmsted County, shameless plug, on our website. We have a community indicators report. My colleague Neethi pulls together, giving stats, different things, pulling in from information from multiple resources together to give us a snapshot, if you will, of our area. Olmsted County Residential Survey, another document that was reviewed, the Community Health Needs Assessment as well. That's listed on here. Some others from nonprofit organizations. I recall the IMMA Whole Families report, and if I hope I'm getting that title right, was also in the list, as well as many others. Additionally, the subgroup reviewed, as well as the Maxfield report, it's called, the Comprehensive Housing Needs Analysis for Olmsted County. So 211 data. And then if you remember, there were a couple of COVID impact surveys that were in the field. I believe the city did one and the county did one as well. So those were made available, as well as numerous speakers came in from the organization to share about their programs, data, information, gaps they saw, right? Some of them, a number of them, right, they're be considered subject matter experts. So the subgroup wanted to hear, hey, from your point of view, what's a good recommendation look like for us to consider? Excuse me. And then they took that information, met, and by November, when was it? October, November, met in person, really in November, met in person to define that first cut, that first draft of the recommendations, and then went back to their advisory groups rather, to present. All right, next slide, and I believe handoff to Abby. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Amy. All right, so I'm going to be going over this next chunk in our timeline. So beginning in January of earlier this year, engagement activities were held and led by Olmsted County staff, and these included general sessions with Olmsted County staff, as well as with community organizations and partners. And finally, a survey was on the county's website for the general public to respond to. And then we worked with Diversity Council and the Community Mobilization Resource Coalition, you all, and contracted with you to conduct engagement activities to gather feedback from our BIPOC communities. And we define BIPOC as Black, Indigenous, and people of color. The term is intended to center the experience of Black and Indigenous groups and demonstrate solidarity between communities of color. And we'll have more on these results in the next couple of slides from the engagement sessions. In July, we received a report from Olmsted County staff that summarized all the data and information. And this was reviewed and used to finish the ultimate goal of writing those final recommendations, which was done at the end of the summer. All right, so this slide goes through who participated in the engagement sessions led by Olmsted County staff. So in total, there were 4 different engagement groups. This slide reflects, like I said, the groups that Olmsted County led. There were 362 surveys completed or engagement participants. Almost half we heard from were identified as white, or they identified themselves as white. 23% identified as BIPOC. 61% of the respondents were from Rochester residents. The age of respondents was fairly equally distributed, and just over half of respondents identified as female. You look at the right-hand side of the screen, this shows the themes from the qualitative information collected, and this is very high-level overall themes. We'll get into the themes related to the focus areas that we discussed with engagement participants, but this is high level. So one thing was we needed to define terms. Public health, government, we're known for using a lot of acronyms and terms that maybe aren't necessarily known broadly among community members. And so we learned a lot through this experience in that we need to define terminology better, or perhaps use different words to describe versus using jargon. That there's connection to recommendations and impacts on racism. So making it very clear how these focus areas or the final recommendations, the draft recommendations are impacted by racism. So like, why is housing impacted by racism for individuals, et cetera. And then there's lots of opportunities for collaboration identified, as well as some mixed reviews on if racism is an issue within Olmsted County. And I will say that that theme came primarily from the online survey. All right, and then this shows a little bit about the participants in the BIPOC community focus groups. So there were 8 different communities that participated. The Cambodian community, South Asian Indian, Arabic, Somali, Hispanic, Latinx, Chinese, East Asian, African American, Black, historically enslaved, and Indigenous and Native American communities. And the total participants were, there were 162 individuals. The overall themes with the BIPOC engagement sessions included that there were opportunities to collaborate. So again, something that we heard in the Olmsted County led engagement sessions. Language barriers were an issue. And I will also say, again, we learned quite a bit in that we needed to find our terminology more clearly. And then there was a feeling that this was authentic engagement and that we should continue to do similar projects this way and gather input. So we're going to be reviewing all the different focus areas coming up, but I think we need to level set a little bit on why these focus areas relate to race and racism. So to some, these focus areas may seem removed from the concept of health for some of us. However, health is so much more than just the type of care we receive at the doctor's office. We wanted to highlight the county health rankings model, which is up on the screen. And this is a framework that outlines numerous factors that influence an individual's health. The percentages next to the darker blue boxes show how much influence they each have over someone's health. So I'd like to know the social and economic factors, such as employment and community safety, influence nearly 40% of a person's health outcomes. To put this into context, if someone works the graveyard shift and doesn't feel safe in their neighborhood, they may experience higher levels of stress, which then can result in high blood pressure and heart issues. One thing that isn't on this model, but is well known in research, is the impact that race has on health outcomes. Our local community health needs assessment consistently highlights the disparities in health outcomes in our neighbors of color compared to our white neighbors. In an innovative and very democratic approach, we felt that hearing from the community members who are experiencing disparate outcomes would be the best source of knowledge to ensure Olmsted County can provide the foundation of a vibrant community. So I'm just going to quickly go over what you're going to be seeing on the next few slides. So what we'll do is we're going to be going through each focus area, which will be right here at the left top corner. Then the report pages are listed for reference, and I had put the link in the chat to get you quickly to the website. So if you want to reference that and see all the final recommendations there, you can do that. And then we'll have the aim statement, which is just high level, what the aim of the focus area recommendations are trying to do. Sorry, I have like a fuzz flying in front of my face. And then there will be highlighted engagement themes, and these are primarily coming from BIPOC community members. And then finally, the total number of recommendations. So I am now going to pass it off to Paula to start us.
You're muted, Paula.
Thank you. Appreciate it. All right. So one area of focus was accountability. To truly make a difference, there must be a system and process for measuring progress and ensuring accountability. The volunteer joint study members, the county staff with whom we spoke, and the community members who provided feedback all emphasized the need to build benchmarks and annual reporting into the system. Now that the county board has accepted the report, the work now turns to the county staff to implement the recommendations, measure the results, and report back to the public each year. Then, guided by the data and community input, the goal is to continually improve those services. Okay, the next slide, please. Another area of focus is advisory boards. One primary mechanism for the public to provide input to the county is through volunteer advisory boards, much like the 2 advisory boards that prepared this report. There's often a lack of diversity on county advisory boards in terms of race and ethnicity, place of residence in the county, and lived experience. Removing barriers to participation will allow a broader representation of people in the community to serve, thus reflecting more adequately those impacted by inequities and in turn the solutions proposed. Specific options to improve diversity could include recruitment activities, virtual participation in meetings, incentivizing participation, and even ensuring relevance of advisory board functions to the community served. Next slide. Criminal justice. Criminal justice was ranked by the community as the #1 area where improvements could impact systemic racism. In Minnesota, Blacks, Latinx, and Native Americans are overrepresented in prisons and jails. Focusing on areas that were within the county's jurisdiction, the aims of the joint study were to, 1, remove barriers to those currently in crisis and those with a history in the criminal justice system so that they can achieve independent living. And 2, support the continued training of Olmsted County staff in de-escalation practices. To remove barriers to formerly incarcerated people, we included recommendations for the county to work with community partners to ensure free expungement processes are readily available to people who have committed minor offenses. For example, nonviolent offenses such as low-level drug crimes. We also recommended that the county work to ensure people with criminal records have access to housing options. One area of improvement that was underway as we began the study was in community corrections. Community outreach specialists were being hired to serve as co-responders with law enforcement to provide support relating to mental illness, chemical dependency, and homelessness. This team also provides resources through a continuum of care model, including jail diversion and reentry into the community. Measuring outcomes of these efforts and reporting on them annually to the public will allow for continued input and improvement of these programs. Finally, state law requires that law enforcement receive crisis intervention training, which includes continuing education on mental health and de-escalation practices. The joint study recommendations include evaluating how effectively law enforcement and co-responders de-escalate and respond to people in mental health crisis. Okay, now I'll turn it over to Kristen.
Yes, so the next focus area that our recommendations fell into was in the area of customer service. And our aim with this focus area were recommendations that would support practices that gather the voice of Olmsted County customers and recipients. It was clear from data sources like the residential survey and from community partner feedback that some of the residents of Olmsted County do not have a clear understanding of the resources and services that the county provides. And there are many of them. And more importantly, how to access them. And so, again, we have 4 recommendations in this area to make this a bit easier. Next slide. The next area that we focused on was on data collection and use. And the aim of these recommendations are all to focus on how Olmsted County can maximize and streamline their data systems. When we met as a group with Olmsted County staff, we often heard that it was really hard to collect and review their data. And we realized that an infrastructure was needed for review of data because you cannot change what you can't measure. Without a clear understanding, the county won't be able to make meaningful changes that will benefit the clients that they serve. And very importantly, from the community engagement sessions, we recognize that there is a need in building up these data systems for the county to work alongside BIPOC communities that are being served to understand how data gathering methods within their communities will be used and improve culturally responsive data gathering methods. Back to you, Paula.
Okay, financial health. Financial health was ranked 4th by the community in terms of its potential to impact systemic racism. One of the 4 recommendations in this area addresses emergency assistance and the need to ensure community members are not falling through the cracks. Currently, emergency funding is only for specific uses and requires that applicants first be denied support through other county programs. A second recommendation supports the expansion of an Olmsted County integrated services program that would allow financial assistance for individuals or families that are experiencing poverty and would also address problems with what is called the benefits cliff, which is a loss in government benefits that is larger than an increase in wages. Addressing these issues will give community members the ability to improve their overall financial situation. Data from the community engagement sessions reinforces the need to address these 2 issues. Okay, next slide, please. Housing. In the area of housing, rental assistance and home ownership were ranked by the community as 2nd and 3rd in terms of their potential to address systemic racism. Although homelessness ranked lower, county data indicate that across all 3 areas, homelessness, rental assistance, and home ownership, there are large disparities by race. For example, 77% of Olmsted County residents own their homes, while only 22% of Black families do. As you know, the discriminatory, now illegal, practices of redlining and racial covenants, both here in Olmsted County and across the nation, have contributed to the low rate of home ownership among Blacks over time, and in turn, the accumulation of intergenerational wealth among Black families. Indeed, data from the Maxfield study indicate that Black community members have the highest percentage of renter-occupied households in the county. Because rents climb regularly, while the cost of a mortgage decreases relative to income, a key recommendation is to increase BIPOC home ownership with a focus on shifting BIPOC renters to owners. In addition, there is a continued need for affordable and subsidized rental housing in Olmsted County, according to the Maxfield study. Given that 80% of county clients needing rental housing assistance are people of color, low inventory or voucher wait lists fall disproportionately on them. We recommend increasing the number of affordable, subsidized, and rental options in the county. Finally, Olmsted County data indicate that homelessness affects Blacks in the community more when considering the percent of population they represent. We recommend improving the process, including coordinated entry, for housing people across the housing continuum: emergency shelter, transitional housing, supportive housing, subsidized housing, and affordable market rate housing. Okay, I'm going to turn it back to Kristen to finish the focus areas.
Yes, so 2 more left. So the next one that we focused on was on organizational culture and systems. And this is within Olmsted County services and among staff. So internal to the work. And our aim for this focus area was to present recommendations that would help the county foster a welcoming community that values belonging, equity, diversity, and dignity in people and ideas. This was a very high priority focus area for us, and it's really foundational in creating an organizational culture that has strategies that support all 5 of the basic human needs, including belonging, respect, choice, safety, both physical and psychological, and joy. It's critical for these recommendations and for the organization, Olmsted County as an organization, to take care of its own staff in order to be able to take care of those folks in the community. Next slide. And the last focus area focused on mental health and substance abuse. And this is an area that we in the subgroup recognized intersects with all of the other focus areas that we've talked about so far, especially criminal justice, housing and homelessness, and financial health and stress. A lot of these things can lead to one another. And so we came up with 6 recommendations, and a lot of them focus on having culturally relevant services in mental health and substance abuse to help break this, the intersectionality of this cycle. And our aim is to promote strategies that reduce stigma and barriers, especially in BIPOC communities, in the areas of mental health, and increase access, again, to these culturally sensitive providers. And we want to support strategies that prevent substance abuse, reduce harm, and support resiliency and recovery. Next slide. So in total, our group came up with 42 recommendations that, again, are all listed in the report that you have the link to. I think I will be passing it off to Lee to talk about what we did after we put these recommendations together.
Great, thank you, Kristen. If you can't hear me, please let me know. I think people can hear me okay. So the subgroup did all this amazing work, and then the subgroup members, along with Amy and Abby, presented to the county board on October 4th of this year, so just a few weeks ago. They shared the 42 recommendations, as well as some context around how they got to those. And the board voted to accept the final report and those recommendations, which was really great to have their support for that. So next steps are planning for how we're going to implement these recommendations within the organization. So as we move towards implementation planning, it's a lot, 42 recommendations to take on in an organization the size of Olmsted County. So to start, we're going to establish a governance structure for that. So to give us some oversight, some management of that work, teams there to help implement, and then teams there to support that work as it moves forward. We also plan to develop a communications plan, which likely will include external community partners such as this to keep you in the loop as to how things are going. And then as we get started, we need to do like an internal inventory of all the work that we're already doing. That's going to help us target where we can start, who's got the resources to start, where have we already started doing this work that we can leverage as we move forward. And then from there, we're going to create our long-term work plan. So as we then move from that planning phase into actual implementation, we're going to keep a lot of factors in mind as we move forward. So as our previous presenters shared, a lot of our BIPOC community partners shared like their priority. They thought I think it was like criminal justice was the #1 priority for that. So that will be taken into consideration. We also need to consider things like how feasible is this recommendation to implement? Is this something that's going to take us a long time and a lot of resources, or is this something that we can, is it a quick win for us? We have to consider things like capacity, where we might need to build up capacity in order to implement something successfully. And where we might have some really great opportunities to get moving on things. So the first thing we're going to do, though, we've already decided, is that we are going to start by getting that advisory board put together, which I believe was the number, like not necessarily the top recommendation, but the first recommendation within the report. The idea there is that if we can get that advisory board made up of community members developed, they can help us drive the implementation and strategize around that and provide some input and direction and support for us moving forward. I think something that we've learned and are continuing to learn how best to do it is to how we can engage and co-design this work as we go forward and not do it in isolation. I think from here I go to Abby. All right.
Yes. So I just wanted to do one more big thank you for all of the subgroup members, the 9 volunteers, highlighting, and this is a conservative estimate on how much time and effort they put into this. But to start, we can look at how many virtual meetings they attended, 31, and there were probably more. All the in-person meetings we had, there were 8 of those, most of which were about 3 hours long. And it was when we were drafting the recommendations or creating the draft recommendations and then finalizing recommendations. And then in total, our meeting hours were 774 hours. So that this is probably just a drop in the bucket really, because it doesn't include all the time they spent researching, reading articles, attending other meetings, going to the community engagement sessions. This is like I said, a very conservative estimate. And to think that these individuals were not county employees, these are people that were completely volunteering their time because they believed in the effort, is truly amazing. So just thank you to all the subgroup members. All right, and we're going to open it up for questions, and I'm going to stop sharing so I can see people and I don't look like I'm staring off all over the place because I have a few screens up here. Like how do I, there we go. Did I do it right? I think so.
Okay, maybe I'll ask the first question. So it's very impressive in terms of the number of hours and effort that's been put in to get the report. So my imagination is implementing, holding everybody accountable. Those number of hours or even, much more than this. So the question is, would there be funding that you would be gathering, some grant writing, that type of opportunity that might exist to fund the overseeing the execution of a plan? Is that the thought, some of the thought there?
Looking at faces, I think I'm going to take this one. I think it really depends on which recommendation it is. And can it be something where we shuffle some of the work that we're doing to reprioritize some of this work and reallocate our resources? Or is it something that's truly a new initiative that we need funding and support for? So, each recommendation is probably going to be individually assessed in that way. Is it something where we can rely on taxpayer dollars for support, or is it something where we do need to seek out some philanthropic dollars, that kind? We do have a couple of grant applications out there to help support the advisory board work. We do want to make sure that we're compensating this accountability advisory group that is coming in and supporting us in this. As well as, funding things like maybe some external facilitation, those random things that come up. So in short, a combination.
Comment, a question, I guess. Thank you so much. This was really informative and really appreciative of all the data behind all of it. And my question was more about collaboration. So I know it's very much centered on the county now, but are there ways that we could engage with city and other entities, and just wanting to know selfishly how to collaborate on that? And then I have a follow-up question after that.
Yes. Yes, please. I think hearing from other perspectives and other people in this work is always valuable. So I do think as we put together like our community council, so our One Olmsted initiative in Olmsted County is putting together this community council, and the accountability advisory board that's mentioned in the final report that's going to support the joint study response is going to live within that community council. And so I do think that we are hoping to have representation from some community organizations there, as well as people with lived experience, some non-leaders in our community. So just a really nice, diverse group there. But I do think that there's going to be times where we need to do some benchmarking and just seeking some peer support. So yes. And I'm wondering if maybe Paula or Kristen, if you see any opportunities from within the recommendations that you might want to like suggest would be a good place for us to partner, just to put you on the spot there.
Yeah, I'll say that there are. Oops, I'm sorry. I'll be very short, Paula. I'll say that there are several recommendations that I can't think of off the top of my head right now, but many of them start off with work with community partners too. So we recognize as a group that a lot of this work and a lot of the recommendations we had may already be existing work or things that could be of interest, to the community partners. So, and then it works better to work together. So sorry, Paula.
No, that's fine. That's fine. Two areas come to mind immediately, and one of them is the sort of criminal justice area, because the Olmsted County, it has sort of jurisdiction of the sheriff's office, but not the Rochester Police Department. And so if there's some opportunities sort of for collaboration and work in that space there, that would be helpful. Another area is housing. And there are so many groups working on the housing issue right now. There really needs to be some, I think, cross-fertilization of ideas, some working together to really take advantage of the energy behind it right now. So you mentioned, Chow, that the city is doing some work in that area. I know there's a housing alliance. There are other groups in the area that are working on the housing issue. So I think that would be another area that would be ripe for collaboration.
And I think Charlotte has something to share. I see your hand's been up for a while. Just wanted to make sure that was.
It's not, I just have a question, and Paula, in some ways you've answered it. My question is about some of your recommendations, particularly the criminal justice system and housing. The recommendations have been out for a bit. What sort of response have you gotten from, say, the chief of police? And how do you view the potential relationship? What kind of feedback have you gotten from housing? Because that's not a quick fix. But how has the report been received? And so that you can figure out those partnerships that you envision.
I think this was one for the county staff to maybe pick up. I've heard nothing but, good feedback about the recommendations, but of course, it's really about the implementation part, right? It's about taking it to the next step and seeing it over the finish line and seeing if there's some real difference that can be made in the community. So, but I don't know if the county staff have heard any feedback from law enforcement or the housing. I think there's a presentation that's coming up with the Housing Alliance, and then we'll have a better sense of how others we're sort of working in partnership on this issue will react. But county staff, any ideas? Have you heard any feedback from law enforcement?
Not that I'm aware of. I don't think we have heard reaction from law enforcement.
Tawanda have a question, raise her hand.
Well, wait, yeah, thank you. I see that we have Miriam and Tawanda.
Yep.
And I'd be respectful. Thank you, Elle.
Tawanda, you want to ask a question first?
Yeah, sure. It's just a question with the recommendations. Were there any timelines placed with those recommendations at all?
So I can talk briefly about this. So the recommendations now, they're going to that planning phase. So there's going to be a kind of an inventory of what we're already working on, where kind of looking at, is it a long-term goal? Is it a short-term recommendation? Looking at all of those different pieces. So at this point, no, there isn't a specific timeline for the recommendations. That's kind of where B is headed, is to figure out what is that timeline and where do we start?
I think though that having that annual reporting is going to give you the, community a sense of where things are. And it sounds like Lee is going to be communicating that through the implementation work too. But I do think that it's important. I guess Al put in the chat the link to the report that a number of people worked on like 20 years ago, right? This has a lot of similar recommendations in it. It's an awesome report. But I think the difference here is that the county asked for this, the county accepted the report, and there's an implementation team now that's going to move it forward. I do think it's important for the community to stay on top of it, to stay interested in what's happening, to stay invested in it, and then to provide feedback, as you get updates on where things stand. We intended it. We were very serious about this from very early on. We do not intend for this to be a report that, gathers dust. We don't want it to sit on the shelf. We want it to really make a difference in the community. And so, but it's going to be up to all of us to make sure that that's happening. But I think I have a sense of, I think the county's serious about it. So.
Miriam, and then I think Stephanie, were you able to ask your question, or did you get an answer in those responses?
I think Stephanie's got her hand raised.
Okay, so
Miriam's been waiting. Miriam's been waiting, actually.
Oh, Miriam lower her hand though.
Okay, I'm
Okay.
ready. I'm ready.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you so much for all the efforts and being able to work on those processes and the recommendations. And now it's specific to what the title was talking about race and racism on health issues. So I know that we are also working parallel with other entities. And I'm glad Paula was talking that, yes, that they're going to be doing collaborations and they're going to do an inventory of who's working on what. Because again, as CMRC has been part, the members that we're here, we're also collaborating in other recommendations that has been done in the past. And but then it doesn't come to working together. Public health right now probably is going to be invited to be in it's called Seed to Dream. That is the University of Minnesota with Hennepin County and Mayo Clinic, that they are doing similar work. And the thing is that putting our heads together, we're going to be able to come up with stronger practices or recommendations to practices that are going to move policies. So at the end, what do we want? Just to work in the county, or do we want to work in the whole state to move policies, to move insurance, to pay for mental health, insurances that will help with other things that that are needed? We are stuck the moment that we don't have health access.
Some of our recommendations included asking the county to look at some state legislative issues. So we do have that as part of what we're doing. I do think that many of us see this. We want the county to be an example of how you can do this, and we want to be successful. And once we achieve that, I think it can be a role model for, for other counties in the state to kind of move forward. But there may be, it may be that as the implementation planning goes, further along, and each individual department is working on their set of issues, that it may come up that either what's standing in the way or what could help move something forward is a policy issue at the state level. And I don't see any reason why the department wouldn't put that on the county's agenda. Maybe the county staff can speak to that issue.
Good evening, everyone. Amy here. No, right. I'm sitting over here, Paul. I'm like, nodding. Right. So we have an advocate at the state, Jennifer Burkholm. So I was just, as you were talking, I was thinking, absolutely, I could see that could be a resource and work with her for things to push up to the state. I know that was in the purview of the subgroup members if they had something to recommend for the state legislative agenda. But Abby, Lee, anything to add? Please do.
I think I'd say that, most of our departments also have, a lot of county government has connections with state work that's also being done in their area of work. So like, for example, in human services, there's an equity partnership that's between DHS and the counties. And so a lot of these ideas then go there. And so there's a lot of information exchanged and some collaborations that happen statewide that can be leveraged moving forward on that.
All right, I see that we have
Stephanie first. Yep.
Stephanie,
you got the floor.
I'm here, okay. Y'all. Hey,
Yep.
everybody. How y'all doing?
Good.
I'm so happy to be here and to see everybody tonight. And I'm going to be real careful, like with my words. So if I talk slow, it's just because I'm choosing my words very carefully. So I, full disclosure, was part of the joint study. So I have read through the recommendations and I've seen them. I guess I kind of have a two-part question as well. So one thing I noticed with a lot of the recommendations is it looks like from a funding standpoint that a lot of the recommendations are internal. So things that need to be fixed, within the systems, whether it be the way the systems communicate with each other or how the systems communicate information out into the community. But it seems very, very much encased within the working system, that whatever working system the county or the other agencies involved currently use. There was quite a few recommendations that speak directly to internal working. So with that comes my concern as a woman of color, as a Black woman of color, is that I find some concern in how we will actually see these goals implemented in real time. So how they will directly impact the communities that they're supposed to be impacting. I personally think that a lot of the things in these recommendations are a little bit high level. So like I said, they're internal working things. There are things that are kind of behind the scenes. It doesn't seem to be as much boots on the ground types of dollars to really start to move towards what the implied statement is, which is the systemic racism. So I guess my question is, how do you see that implementing? And then again, as I'm also aware that this is a numbers game. So even when we're talking about affordable housing, I know that all of these things are based off of numbers and statistics. So even currently, the affordable housings that they are currently building, are over $250,000, which, like we said, that's not affordable to almost anyone in the working class, to anybody making less than, in that $20 an hour or less range. And then when I've been to some of those meetings, it's based on the medium income. So Rochester has a interesting issue, as we have people in a very high bracket and then people at a very low bracket. So I'm just interested into how are we really going to see this money or these things actually impact the people that we say we are trying to impact? Because right now, it sounds like a lot of money is going to be going towards administration, for lack of better words.
Stephanie, thank you for the comments. I think they're very important. I think they're sort of two pieces to this. One is some of the recommendations that were focused more internally are really needed to kind of move this forward. You know, this whole accountability piece, for example, if we don't have the numbers and we're not benchmarking it, we're not reporting back to the community, then we don't know if we've made progress. And so I think some of those are really important. But I do think there's a need for people with a lived experience to be, you know, part of this process. And one of the places where there is an opportunity is, I think, through this accountability, advisory board. We spent a lot of time thinking about what that looked like. We thought, well, we could have this sort of external advisory board that was sort of overseeing it. But then we realized that if they didn't have a connection to the county in a more formal way, they may not have sort of the power to move things forward. And so we really wanted to embed some of it within the county, and people who are committed to this issue, DEI issues, and wanting to move these things forward. And so, you know, we kind of centered it within the One Olmsted group, with volunteer community members participating in it. And so hopefully doing that will help. But I think there may be, and I think that this, I'd be interested in hearing the county staff's opinion on this, but let's just take housing, for example. I completely agree with you. And I will tell you that when we were doing this, I did this tour of southeastern Minnesota with Sheila Cascaden, commissioner on the county board. And, we were driving on this bus and we were looking at the cost of housing in Stewartville and other, areas 30 minutes, 45 minutes away from here. And we were looking at $250,000 houses. And I kept saying, this is not affordable to a lot of people. And even the county staff were saying, yeah, it's hard for us to even sort of reach that. So it's on their radar too. But I think in that area, it would be nice to be able to involve some people in these specific recommendations, people from the community who are going to be affected by this recommendation, and having that conversation with them as you move forward.
I'll just add to exactly what Paula said, and also just add, what Amy shared at the beginning in terms of what was our scope, right, as a joint study. So you'll notice in looking at all of the recommendations, that there is a variety, that there are some recommendations that are very much internal, and then some recommendations that are a bit more external. But what was in our scope and what we were asked to do was to look at things that the county had control over, internal systems. And we were also, as a subgroup, we're very mindful to have an eye to systems. And so that's what we prioritized, were the systems, and that would hopefully have a trickle down effect. And with things like accountability and data systems, we could, those recommendations will hopefully be able to give a look at, how are real folks on the ground being affected by these things. So I feel like there was one other point I was going to make, but I can't think of it, so I'll stop there.
Looks like Donna has her hand raised. Donna, you want to say something? Is that George?
George
Oh,
has
sorry.
been up a while.
It was George. Sorry, George. Yeah,
Oh,
it was George.
I did raise my hand.
You did? Okay.
Yeah.
All right,
Okay.
okay. Go ahead.
So, I'm not the puppy anymore. So I was on this joint study committee as well. What if you dive into the actual 42 recommendations, there are some specific recommendations that we did ask the county to consider that would be out in the community, in the BIPOC community. It's not all internal. Half of it is internal, but the other half is external. So I think we just need to dive into all 42 recommendations, which isn't presented all here. We're just doing focus areas, high-level focus areas in this presentation.
I agree. What I'll say from a staff perspective there, and I'm going to be really quick because I know other people have questions, is that, and I'm going to be careful with my words here, but just like any organization, I think we have a lot of room to grow internally with our culture and our, our culture. And so I think it is appropriate in some places to focus on the internal, because I think there's a little bit of a fear of putting the cart before the horse, but definitely appreciate your comments, Stephanie, and are going to take them with us as we move forward.
Okay.
Can I make a comment before?
Okay,
I just want to make a couple of points. One of them is that thank you folks for your difficult work and hard work. And if you take a look at Al Lund's website sometime, you can see on there the county board meeting where they approved the plan. And you can also see in there where there's a gentleman named Matt Flynn, who was on the county board at that time, who pulled up the report and showed it. And I was on that report, or my name is on that report. One of the difficulties that you always have is, and I listen to the material and I appreciate it, but you can learn a lot from older people. And you can also learn some things in terms of some shortcuts. But one of the things that needs to happen is, as Stephanie pointed out, we need to figure out some ways of getting funding for folks who are down on the ground doing the work. And so I just want to, I put my hand up first, but Stephanie got in, said what she needed to say, and I appreciate that. But that's what needs to happen. And we were able to figure out some time ago some ways to do that. So, but that effort, obviously, racism is something that's cyclic and it's all around us, and we constantly need to work on it all the time. So, but I want you to think about what can be done. And I also want to compliment Stephanie and her search group for being awarded as bridge builders in this community. And they're going to be receiving an award on December 2nd. And I'm extremely happy to know that they have gotten permission for that award. So at any rate, Stephanie, keep up the work. And I appreciate we're handing off the baton to some young people who are doing some wonderful things. And thank you, committee, for your work. And I'll just say you can continue to learn a lot from older people. All right.
Okay. Eddie, Lauren, you have you have hand raised.
Hi, team. Thank you, Al, for inviting just community members to come to this. I would encourage you to continue to reach out to just lay people in the community to super get involved, and just thank you for all you guys have done. I'm here. My grandchildren will be BIPOC and Muslim. I'm very involved in this movement, and I really appreciate all you're doing. So Godspeed, and thank you for all you're doing. Thank you.
Okay. I have my hand raised, so I always just.
Yep, you and Annie.
Okay, 2 minutes for myself. Okay, what I mean, just to say that I think from my own personal standpoint, using my beam portal, I'm gonna be the bad guy. Quote unquote. Be to say, watch that something will happen. I want to shine light on what you have declared you would do, And hopefully, and I would hold you accountable, hold all of us accountable. That's the way that I would play it. And I think, I think I'm speaking for CMRC in that regard, is that we would be watching. We would be holding all of us together, ourselves, obviously. We do our part. We also will hold everyone accountable in terms of making progress. Okay, I'll lower my hand. Okay, I just said my piece. Is Annie still there, or Annie has left? Because since I noticed she had to leave to take care
Looks
of
like we
her
lost
son.
her.
Yeah, so maybe that's what she was. So I guess Dee, do you have any couple of words to say, or you in conclusion? Or yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just grateful. I mean, I think probably everyone here has heard from me, right? That that one of the things we consistently have heard and felt from community through this process is how it started in that backward way that we do our business, right? Of saying, we're going to work on this and then show it to you. And we want then feedback rather than that idea of co-designing, right? How do we, so that was a point that came forward a lot, it has come forward a lot. And then the idea of, this is not, these things, the recommendations are charged and weighty and right, it involve a lot of history and personal things in them, and so it became really difficult for lots of people to say, sure, we'll give you let us give you a little feedback on the recommendations that you had. And so just any way to kind of repair and move forward. Thank you, Shay, for your comment, to move forward in a sense of co-designing or being together in the space with people who are impacted by racism as a public health issue, I think would just be, that's where I feel I'm echoing that need for some accountability and some, again, I'm so grateful that this work has taken place. And, I feel, very, that we have an amazing county with amazing human beings in it, as far as our county administration. But I would just look for that in the future, this way of how do we now join a bit more together in our approach to moving these things forward and addressing the issues.
Okay, with that, if there's no more points being raised, then I wish everyone good evening. How is that? Thank you very much for being here. Annie, okay. Yep.
Good
okay,
evening.
bye. Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.